Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for another poetry discussion. This is a poetry discussion that will take place in two separate playlists here on the channel. The first, obviously, being the poetry discussion playlist, but the second being the National Poetry Month 2021 playlist. I will be doing a poetry discussion every day of the month in April 2021. Maybe I'll make it a yearly thing. I don't know. It's hard to say. It's a lot of work, but the poem in question today is "The Brain is Wider Than the Sky" by Emily Dickinson. So this month I have different days. One second. I have a different day of the month set up for each of these poets. Mondays are Langston Hughes, Tuesdays are Sylvia Plath, Wednesdays are Charles Bukowski, Thursdays are Emily Dickinson, Fridays are again Charles Bukowski, and Saturdays are for Robert Frost. Sundays are a wild card sort of day. I'm not sure. There's some different poets, some different poems I want to talk about, but I don't know that there are any American poets that I want to dedicate an entire day of the month to this year, possibly in the future. But "The Brain is Wider Than the Sky." This is on page 312 of the complete poems. It is poem number 632. The brain is wider than the sky, for put them side by side, the one the other will contain with ease, and you beside. The brain is deeper than the sea, for hold them blue to blue, the one the other will absorb, as sponges buckets do. The brain is just the weight of God, for heft them pound for pound, and they will differ if they do, as syllable from sound. One of the things that I enjoy most about Emily Dickinson is that I think this is sort of a property of the metaphysical poets. Let me pull metaphysical poets up, and we'll read the definition here. One of the things that I enjoy most about Emily Dickinson is the fact that she is willing to use words as terms, not simply descriptors, right? I died for beauty. Now, this poem is an exploration of beauty. We're not calling something beautiful. We're saying beauty is a thing. The brain is wider than the sky, for put them side by side, the one the other will contain with ease, and you beside. So what does this even mean? We have to conceptualize the brain, we have to conceptualize the sky, and we have to understand that what she means by the one the other will contain is the fact that your mind can take in all of what the sky means and hold it. Metaphysical poets. The term, this is just straight off Google here, from Wikipedia, the term metaphysical poets was coined by the critic Samuel Johnson to describe a loose group of 17th century poets whose work was characterized by the inventive use of conceits, by a greater emphasis on the spoken rather than lyrical quality of their verse. So when we're talking about conceits, what we're conceding here, the brain is wider than the sky. What does that even mean? We have to conceptualize it. Willing to grant that to the poet, we then, as the reader, have to do the work with it. Obviously, the writer, Emily Dickinson, the speaker, whoever that may be here, has some conceptualization of what that means. But in this way, what that's doing is a great literary feat because it forces on the reader responsibility in the poem. I think that every poem that's good, but every poet in their own way forces responsibility on the reader. Oftentimes, this is fairly consistent in a poet. In Bukowski, you've got to find the pretty thing inside a stable of horse shit. Because there's a pretty thing in there. He's got it in there. You've got to find it. And that is where the poetry comes from in that poem. With William Shakespeare, oftentimes what we're doing is taking some... It's funny. A lot of times he takes something that with which you are familiar and defamiliarizes it, which is something that was really, really popular 19 teens. Make It Strange. What Emily Dickinson does is she gives you things that you know. The brain, the sky, the sea, God. She gives you things that you know, and she forces you to play with your own definitions of them. The brain is wider than the sky. Well, even if we're accepting the brain as the mind, what does it mean for the mind to be wide? What does it mean for the sky to be wide? Where are we stopping our consideration of the sky and starting our consideration of space? And because we are forced to do this, we are then on her grounds. We have said, okay, brain is wider than the sky. I'm with you. I'm willing to consider this. Now, where are we going? And then she walks you through the brain is deeper than the sea. Okay, so we're talking about expanse. I can get that. If for nothing else than the very fact that I understand everything you're saying, obviously the brain is wider than the sky because I can conceptualize the sky and you. The brain is deeper than the sea. Okay, so we're talking about size. The brain is just the weight of God. Okay, so we've reconceptualized. We've taken it back a step. We've started over. For heft them pound for pound, and they will differ if they do as syllable from sound. Well, now you've got to deal with syllables and sound. How are syllables and sound different? Well, they're the same thing, just broken up into different parts. Or are they? Every syllable is a sound. Every sound might as well be a syllable. We're taking the simplest fragment of speech and considering it on its own. That may as well be a syllable. In speech, it's a syllable. How do we know that every sound is not just speech of some sort? The speech of the universe. And it would be very easy to say, well, speech of the universe, that doesn't make sense. Then you haven't read Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson is not afraid to consider things in these ways. But this poem always hits me, and it always hits me hard. A lot of times, Emily Dickinson starts a poem very strong. Her opening lines at times are, I would say she's got the greatest opening lines in all of poetry. I'm biased, I know that. That's fine. But some of her opening lines are just so good. The problem oftentimes comes shortly thereafter because it's very difficult to follow some Emily Dickinson some of the time. What am I saying? A lot of Emily Dickinson a lot of the time. It's almost like translation sometimes with her. But this poem, from the first word to the last word, she's speaking very clearly. The brain is wider than the sky, for put them side by side, the one the other will contain with ease, and you beside. She's talking about conceptualization here. You can understand what the sky means, and you can understand what you means. You can even understand what me means. The brain is deeper than the sea, for hold them blue to blue, the one the other will absorb as sponges buckets do. Deeper. Are we talking about simply size again, or are we talking about what it means to be the nuance of emotion. I think that's where we're going here. The brain is just the weight of God, for heft them pound for pound, and they will differ if they do as syllable from sound. Again, you have a very straightforward phrasing here. But one thing that I struggle with this final stanza of the poem is the fact that it seems there are times through Emily Dickinson's poetry, I'm not sure she was a Christian. She almost definitely did not accept things word for word from her holy scripture. She would have been from a very religious area at a very religious time. So some of these differences between her ideas and those things going on around her would have been very painful and would have been very distracting and would have been very off-putting even to the self. So when she says the brain is just the weight of God, I don't know how to take that. I don't know what to make of that. Is she speaking about the classic God? Is she speaking about just the idea of God? Is she speaking about the Creator? That's what I tend to think of when I think of Emily Dickinson. And in that way, the brain is just the weight of the Creator. For heft them pound for pound, and they will differ if they do as syllable from sound. In this final stanza, we have again a metaphysical idea, a greater emphasis on the spoken rather than the lyrical quality of their verse. We have Emily Dickinson saying that the way we create, the way I create, this poetry that I'm doing, is the same thing as God. Because, just think about it, and if they're different, it's as different as syllable from sound. The difference of sound, spoken, verse spoken aloud. That is all I have for this poetry discussion. Again, like I say, this will be in 2 separate playlists here on the channel, the poetry discussion playlist, as well as the National Poetry Month 2021 playlist here on the channel. And I hope to have you back. I hope to have you back tomorrow for some Bukowski.